That's what his clock looked like the day before he started coconut oil. And this is his clock 2 weeks later. And you can see it went from a few little circles and numbers to a full circle. All the numbers are there. This is at 37 days after, and it's much tidier looking. Um, and you can see that he's lining the numbers up in that case. Over the next days to month, a whole lot of things happened. He was severely depressed, and that his mood greatly lifted. He had hope again. The tremors in his face and hands, basically went away. By 2 months, he could tie his shoes again, which he hadn't been able to do. He could walk normally, completely normally, and run again. And at about 3.5 months, he was able to read again, which was really quite profound. And he was able to do yard work and housework, and he just felt so much more useful, as you might imagine. And he improved so much over the first year that he was able to work as a volunteer in.
First, a quick word from our sponsor.
Did you know that one-size-fits-all supplements are a thing of the past? Today, you can take supplements that are built for your genetic needs. SNP Nutrigenomics makes taking personalized supplements so easy. You'll receive your at-home DNA test kit just days after placing your order, and it will have everything you need to test your DNA from the comfort of your home. After you swab the inside of each cheek, you'll ship the swabs to the HIPAA-compliant lab in Texas using the prepaid envelope. There, the lab will analyze your DNA using state-of-the-art technology and determine for you your unique nutritional formula that provides you with the exact nutrients your body needs. Based on your genetic blueprint, they will take a close look to determine genetic variants you have and exactly which nutrients can help you optimize your genetics. You'll get a customized supplement made to order just for you, and it even has your name on it. It will be shipped to your door on whatever schedule you choose, every 30, 45, or 60 days. It's a one-of-a-kind, all-in-one supplement made just for you.
Welcome, everyone. It's Wednesday, time for Health, Business, and Politics. We have a great show for you coming up. I think so. And I think a lot of cool information, or good information you will need to hear dealing with Alzheimer's and other neural factors. So before we get started, though, and Charlie will tell you more about that, let me show you where our website is on the World Wide Web. Hit that screen share. And we are at yourfreedomhub.com. Actually, that is the real name. And we've got some good things here. We do recommend, hide the panel. You can go to, Charlie, it didn't disappear. I said hide, sorry guys. Hide video panel, and it's still here. Okay, I don't understand. We're having a technical difficulty here. Okay. Picking it up at yourfreedomhub.com, we recommend take a look at your marketplace. So if your health could be a little better, or you got some stuff going on, maybe, you will find some good products, services here. The first one being Charlie's non-traditional, actually, medical cost sharing business, which is an upgrade from Obamacare or traditional insurance. You have you pay less, you have more benefits, a lot more opportunities there, and so definitely check that out. Talk to Charlie about that. If you sign up there, he'll reach out to you. SNP Nutrigenomics. It's one of those days. SNP Nutrigenomics, a DNA personalized supplement, which is pretty cool. It's really a baseline supplement for health. The Cardio Miracle you've probably heard of. So we do appreciate it. Plastic tests. Take a look at some of these and support our sponsors and improve your health. If you want to know what I'm doing, and right now with co-founder Jeff Cantor, take a look at the Pavilion solution, which brings together a lot of the disruptors you see on our show, as well as other walks of life, education, learning, where we're moving to, some endorsements from surgeons and all kinds of people for next generation health, and not just that, well-being. It really, a lot of the stuff we've been missing that we haven't been told the truth about. Science Center, it all comes together at the Pavilion. And then lastly, your Media Hub page, the tab here. First, we do recommend you subscribe right here, because Substack is where we're sending out all our emails from these days, and good stuff. So we have our Wednesday show. Today's our Thursday show, and which is more wider topics, more different selection than health, though we do have some health shows there. And you can take a look at who's coming up for the next month or two, and down below, most viewed shows, and then the channels we post on. Rumble, BitChute, Brighteon. And if you subscribe, though, this comes to your email box, even if you're not a paid subscriber, though we greatly appreciate that. And thank you to those of you who are subscribing. You will get it in the replay in your email inbox, so you can click on the show anytime you want to. All right, so with that, let me stop this. Turn it over to Charlie to introduce the topic and our guest today.
Thank you, Jim, and welcome, Dr. Mary. Let me show the promo that you received today. And if you scroll to the top, you'll notice a nice image that is this. I never know if my camera works for showing props. Well, this is Dr. Mary's book, clearly Keto, which I have, and I received from her at the conference that I advertised in the second paragraph here. Actually, this is the next conference of the Patient First Coalition, which was co-founded by our co-founder, Jeff Cantor. And they have hosted several Healthy America conferences in DC a year ago, between then and now, Pittsburgh, Cleveland, and Salt Lake City. And in the promo that you received Monday in this second paragraph, you are invited to apply to speak at the next conference, July 21st, that week in DC. So just type out a topic and maybe they'll let you speak. So they're very democratic in that way, because it's really a great coalition of entrepreneurs and activists, including Dr. Mary, whom I met at the Pittsburgh conference. And she put on a nice presentation about anti-aging, specifically for Alzheimer's. And she started with the newborns and then moved to hospice. So she's taking care of the whole range of human life. And she is taking on the fight around Alzheimer's, around cholesterol and fat. She, like a lot of people that think for themselves and look at the evidence, have discovered that we have been, well, lied to about cholesterol and fat. And she's looked at the evidence, and she's a big fan of coconut oil. She, along with her partner Steve Zarpas, are working on a new shake for Alzheimer's. That sounds fun and a tasty way to get healthy. She's spoken around the world, as you can read in the promo. And let me just to get back, I wanted to show this real quick. So at the second paragraph, if you do apply to speak, that link takes you to an article about the conference. So you can learn more about this coalition that is right up our alley. Entrepreneurs and activists. Here are links to my articles on their past events. Here is, if you just want to attend in DC, here's the conference link. You scroll down just a little bit to this paragraph, and that has the link to apply. That's the actual link to apply to speak. At the very least, you should join as an ambassador so that you get their emails for future opportunities, including this fall in Nashville. And back to the promo, if you do scroll down, you'll see last week's presentation from David DeHaas about the importance of colonics. I think ultimately, as people suffer the real epidemic of chronic disease, they'll discover the failure of pharma and pills to do anything but create new problems, and you're going to end up at a clinic for a colonic. So I'm a big fan of them, and hopefully others are. If you're still able to get to the Shenandoah of Virginia this Friday, I'll be speaking there along with the famous farmer Joel Salatin. If you've ever been to Polyface Farm, it's an organic farm, actually regenerative, so it's real healthy. And the food, the menu is going to reflect that. Farm to table, delicious. They'll have exhibitors, including raw milk. So if you can make it, great. If you can't, try to meet us in DC. And with that, Dr. Mary, tell us about what's going on with Alzheimer's and anti-aging.
Hi there. Thank you so much for inviting me to be on your podcast. I have a presentation to share. It's about 20 minutes long. Would you like me to go ahead and pull it up? Okay. Let's see here. I will start the presentation. Okay. So, I am, as you've said, a physician. I live in Florida. I practiced newborn intensive care for several decades, but I was also the caregiver for my husband, Steve, who had early onset Alzheimer's, and he had a dramatic improvement that lasted almost 4 years from ketogenic therapy. So that's what I'm going to be talking about. A lot of people are familiar with keto diet, but they might not know that there are actually ketogenic supplements out there that people can take as well. So, Alzheimer's is a huge problem in the United States. It's increased dramatically over the past couple decades to about 7.2 million people that are currently affected, and another 20 million that have mild cognitive impairment that can lead to Alzheimer's. And it's a worldwide problem. And there have been like decades of research, billions of dollars spent, and still no cure. And there are no drugs that improve memory and cognition. Sorry, I'm getting over a bit of a cold, so my voice is a little bit rough. Um, it has a huge effect on families. 1 in 4 people have a close family member that has had or now has dementia, and Alzheimer's is the most common form of dementia. And the costs are enormous. At some point, they need constant supervision and help with every little daily activity. And so somebody either has to quit their job or they need to go in assisted living. And it's a very high financial impact for the family when that happens, averaging about 110,000 annually, and the emotional impact on the family is incalculable. So there are several factors that shape Alzheimer's disease. One is biology that we can't change. So the greatest risk factor is age, and it's quite prevalent over age 85, more common in women, and certain genes give us higher risk. But there are also these modifiable metabolic and inflammatory factors, as well as lifestyle risk factors that appear to account for at least 40 to 50% of dementias. And at the top of that list is an unhealthy diet. So, the dietary guidelines for Americans that have been in effect since about 1980 have been a population-wide experiment that has not gone well. So, these guidelines have included eating low total fat, which translates into high carb, and that's for everybody 2 years or older, low saturated fat, lean meats, limited red meats, low fat, and non-fat dairy. So that's what we've been told for uh, over 40 years, 45 years. But the outcomes have been that Americans have gotten more and more obese. That's adults and children. Diabetes is more prevalent. Alzheimer's, autism, and other neurological and even psychiatric disorders have become much more prevalent during that time. So the Department of HHS has now a food is medicine initiative. It's like a really good time to do the nutritional shake that you mentioned. There are new dietary guidelines that have flipped upside down the food pyramid, emphasizing more healthy proteins and more healthy fats, and less of the grains that we were told we should eat 6 to 11 servings of a day. There's also a new Nutrition Center of Excellence and a new Office of Critical Foods that focuses on medical foods and infant formula. So it's really an opportune time to do what we're doing. and that's their webpage for Food is Medicine. It actually has its own webpage. So there are thousands of studies showing that a healthy whole food diet could slow cognitive decline, literally thousands of studies. And so that is one way to address that lifestyle issue. Alzheimer's could be preventable if lifestyle, risk factors account for 40 to 50%. So I think many people know that or have heard that in Alzheimer's disease, there is a problem with plaques and tangles that accumulate in the brain, and these do damage brain cells, nerve fibers, blood vessels, so they're clearly part of the problem, but they might not be the cause of the problem. For years, it was thought they were the cause of the problem. They might be more a consequence of the underlying problem. And there have been trials of more than 40 drugs that remove plaques from the brain. All of them have failed to improve cognition. They have serious adverse effects. Some even accelerated Alzheimer's disease, and I have a little story about that later. The only one currently on the market is Leqembi, and it only slows cognitive decline for a few months, but it costs about 60,000 a year for the med, every 2-week IV treatments and monitoring with MRIs. And 1 in 5 people have brain bleeding or fluid leakage that take this. And these are people that have mild cognitive impairment and mild Alzheimer's are the only people that can get it. So that's a big risk if you're at that early stage, when people are still quite functional. But the big problem is that these drugs fail to address the brain energy gap. So, decades before symptoms appear, there is already a growing brain energy gap. And what I mean by that, it's a difference between how much energy your brain needs and how much it's actually getting. And the brain tends to shrink a little bit each year because of this. Um, and there are studies, brain imaging studies that were conducted in Canada of hundreds of adults, all ages, and these are people with and without cognitive impairment. And they found that there is a 7 to 9% reduction in energy that's getting to the brain in normal older people. These are people that test normal on memory tests. This worsens to 10 to 12% in people with mild cognitive impairment and accelerates to at least 20% in mild Alzheimer's disease. So this is a big problem. All cells, including brain cells, need energy to carry out all of their functions. And glucose is the main fuel for the brain when people eat a typical diet, a typical American diet, which tends to be higher in carbohydrate. But ketones are an alternative fuel to glucose, and ketones, if you provide them, could actually fill in that brain energy gap. And people have heard of the keto diet, but not necessarily that there are ketogenic supplements and foods out there. But there have been numerous clinical trials of ketogenic diets and these ketogenic therapies that have shown positive effects for Alzheimer's, mild cognitive impairment, and all of the other disorders that you see there on the slide, which are many. Shifting to my husband, Steve, this is a picture of him in 2008 when he was at a kind of moderate to almost on the verge of severe Alzheimer's. And he was the accountant for my medical practice. He worked at home, took care of our children, which made it possible for me to be a mother and a doctor, which I'm eternally grateful to him for. But he began having memory symptoms when he was only age 51, and it worsened so much that he was diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's when he was only 54 years old. This is back in 2004. And by May of 2008, he could no longer turn on a computer that he'd been working on all day, couldn't use a calculator, perform simple math. He could no longer read for about a year and a half, and couldn't finish a sentence. He had tremors. He walked very slowly and stiffly, couldn't run. And he was going to try out for 2 different clinical trials that became available, 2 different drugs in our area, 2 days in a row, which was opportune timing. And I happened to find a press release the night before when I was kind of researching these drugs about a medical food that was going to be on the market about a year later. And it was an MCT oil, a medium chain triglyceride oil, which I'll explain more in a minute, that increases it converts to ketones in the liver when you consume it. And what they found in a pilot study and in a larger clinical trial was that it improved the memory and cognition in nearly half of the people with Alzheimer's that took it. So this really caught my attention. Couldn't, get a hold of this, in time for that first testing for the clinical trial. But this is what happens. Medium chain triglycerides, which come from coconut oil, usually are converted to ketones in the liver, and the ketones are eagerly taken up by the brain and can immediately be used as fuel. So the idea was that providing ketones to the brain could help improve memory and cognition. So MCTs are not present in any of the usual oils that we eat every day, oils and fats, but they do come from coconut oil and palm kernel oil. So the palm kernel is that little white center that you see in the palm fruit there, the little palm fruits at the bottom. And so those are the two richest natural sources of MCTs, but MCTs are also present in dairy, in the dairy fat. So we're talking about human milk and the milk of goats, cows, and other mammals. And so if you eat non-fat milk and dairy, you are not getting any MCTs. If you eat full fat, you're kind of maximizing how much of the MCTs you get from those foods. And the reason I went further with this is because in my practice as a newborn specialist in the 1980s, we were adding MCT oil to the feedings of our tiniest premature newborns. These were babies under 2 pounds. They would gain weight faster and get home. And then formula manufacturers started adding MCTs as coconut oil and sometimes as additional MCTs to the infant formulas to provide those MCTs that are found in human milk. And another interesting thing, in 1999, Dr. Stephen Cunnane in Canada, who's done all these brain imaging studies now, showed that ketones are the building blocks for lipids in the newborn brain. So ketones and MCTs are very important to the newborn. So I learned all about all of this the night before he's trying for a clinical trial and couldn't do anything about it. So he went and was screened, and he needed to score 16 points out of 30 points on a mini mental status exam. And instead, he scored only 14 points, and he did not qualify for the study. And that was enormously depressing to us. And having read what I did the night before, I thought we're going to pick up some MCT or coconut oil. And I couldn't find MCT oil right away, but I did find coconut oil. And I learned that it contains about 60% medium chain triglycerides. So I figured out how much he would need to match the amount of MCTs that are in that medical food that was tested. And this amounted to 35 grams, which is a little over 2 tablespoons. So that's a lot to start with. I don't recommend starting with that amount because some people don't tolerate it very well, but working up to it at least. But the next day, he was trying out for a different clinical trial in a different location, and he had the little bit over 2 tablespoons of coconut oil, and his score increased from 14 to 18 points out of 30 points, which is considered highly significant, and he qualified for the study. And at the time, I thought, did we just get very lucky? Was it prayers or, but the science seemed sound on this, so I decided to continue giving it to him, and I did every morning. And then another thing I had read in their patent application was that the ketone levels from this MCT oil peaked at about an hour and a half and were pretty much gone by 3 hours. But the brain needs fuel 24/7. So I started giving him coconut oil at every meal and eventually a snack in the evening. After 6 weeks, I was able to get my hands on some MCT oil, which gives higher levels of ketones than coconut oil, but coconut oil has other benefits as well. And I started mixing them, slowly increasing it. So eventually he was getting 2 to 3 tablespoons with each meal 3 or 4 times a day, which is a lot. And then we'd already been on a Mediterranean style whole food diet for about 2 years. But we reduced the carbs to kind of compensate for those extra fats that he was getting. And he did quite well with it. And just as a reminder, that's what his clock looked like the day before he started coconut oil. And this is his clock 2 weeks later. And you can see it went from a few little circles and numbers to a full circle. All the numbers are there. He's got all of these lines, and he explained to me he was trying to make it neat, and he was trying to line the numbers up across from each other. And then this is at 37 days after, and it's much tidier looking. Um, and you can see that he's lining the numbers up in that case. So that was a big improvement. And then over the next days to month, a whole lot of things happened. He was severely depressed, and that his mood greatly lifted. He had hope again. The tremors in his face and hands, basically went away. By 2 months, he could tie his shoes again, which he hadn't been able to do. He could walk normally, completely normally, and run again. And at about 3.5 months, he was able to read again, which was really quite profound. And he was able to do yard work and housework, and he just felt so much more useful, as you might imagine. And he improved so much over the first year that he was able to work as a volunteer in the hospital where I worked in the supply warehouse. And he really maintained this for almost 2 years before there was a setback. So one of the biggest questions I get about coconut oil is, but isn't it high in saturated fat and doesn't it raise your cholesterol? So this chart shows, various the common fats and oils that we eat every day. And coconut oil is over on the left, and the blue areas are these medium chain triglycerides. And so you can see that the medium chain triglycerides are the majority of the saturated fats that are in coconut oil. And the orange and red at the top are the heavier saturated fats, the ones that might be a little bit more of concern. And you can see that coconut oil actually has a little less of them than your everyday or oils like corn, olive, palm oil, and sesame, soybean, and sunflower oils. I think soybean, olive, and corn oil are probably the most common that people eat. But you do see the medium change, the blue areas in butter, which is basically milk fat, and a little bit in lard and beef tallow. So it's very rich in medium chain triglycerides, and medium chains are saturated fats, but they're converted to ketones or directly used as energy. They're not stored as fat. So I spent 2 years working on a study related to saturated fat, reviewing all of the studies that were done. I have another paper with Dr. Fabian Dayrit all about that and kind of where the flawed science was in those studies. They included trans fats because they were solid fats. They never distinguished natural saturated fats from solid trans fats. But the other thing that we did, a separate paper that's down there, you see the citation on the bottom, is we analyzed data from 26 studies of people consuming coconut oil that were conducted between 1985 and 2024. And there were 984 complete sets of lipid profiles, cholesterol levels, basically. And what we found when we combined all 984 was that the average change from consuming coconut oil resulted in a slight decrease in total cholesterol, a slight decrease in LDL cholesterol, which is considered the bad cholesterol, and an actual significant increase in HDL cholesterol, which is considered good, and a decrease in triglycerides. Everybody would like to see a decrease in their triglyceride levels. And it really held up whether you looked at short, medium, or long studies. There were really, in the long-term study, there was less than 1% increase in LDL over 2 years. So, you know, on average, that's what you see with coconut oil. When you add up all these studies, there are some studies where the results showed an increase and many other studies that showed a decrease in cholesterol. I'm going to pause for a sip of water. These studies also, none of them reported an increase in body weight. Some reported a decrease. There were a couple where they added all this extra calories as muffins and cookies where people did gain some weight. But none of these studies reported an increase in blood pressure. So that's the story, with cholesterol and coconut oil. It's not such a big problem, and it does vary a lot from person to person. These are averages when you average everybody together, but it means some people had increases and other people's had decreases, and it looked like that was more common in the shorter term studies. But then, you know, the long-term study, there was no difference at any point in that study at 3 months, 1 year, and 2 years in the cholesterol levels between like people taking coconut oil and people taking sunflower oil. I'm like every time I wave over my my computer, it changes the slide. Sorry about that. So my husband, Steve, did really well. He was in that clinical trial for almost 2 years, and they let him continue the coconut and MCT oil. And we found out later that he was actually on the placebo for the first 18 months, but then he switched over to the drug, and that was a disaster. He was only on it for about 6 weeks. We saw a change in his hair color, which was a common side effect of the drug, so we knew he was on it. But then he started having trouble with wounds healing. He fainted. He developed fever blisters, which we hadn't seen for a while. And some of his old symptoms developed and new symptoms of Alzheimer's. I had to start assisting him with everything, you know, picking out his clothes, putting them on, shaving, showering, everything. And it was really disturbing. And what we found, we withdrew from the study after 6 weeks. And we found out later, we were informed that they stopped the study because they found it accelerated Alzheimer's. So this is one of those drugs that lower plaques in the brain. So all along, like really the first week Steve started taking the coconut oil, I started talking with Dr. Richard Beach at the NIH. He spent his career there. He's my hero. And he was extremely interested in Steve. And he basically had developed a ketone ester at the NIH. He'd been studying ketones since the 1990s for Alzheimer's and other disorders and developed the ketone ester. And they had just finished toxicity studies. And he said, why don't we give this to Steve and see if it gets him back? So he sent us the ketone ester. It tasted horrible, but I managed to figure out a way that he could at least drink it. He knew he had Alzheimer's. He had met Dr. Veach. He was eager and excited to try this ketone ester. And he started taking it 3 times a day. And within the first dose, the first 2 hours, he was able to sing and write out the entire alphabet, which he hadn't been able to do for a while. And the next morning, after needing assistance with every little thing from me, I'm sitting at the kitchen table and he walks out and he had already showered, shaved, dressed himself, and brushed his teeth without any assistance. I mean, it was just shocking how much it improved him right away. And within 6 weeks, all of those new problems that we were seeing were gone, and he was back to being able to, you know, help do yard work again, which made him really happy. He loved working in the yard. And he said he felt good, he had more energy, he was happier, and it was easier to do things, which was my observation as well. And it was published. I got to write a paper with Dr. Richard Veach about Steve's case report that was published in the Journal of the Alzheimer's Association called Alzheimer's and Dementia. That was in 2015. So one of the issues with the ketone ester is that it kind of tastes like diluted jet fuel. It's improved a lot since my husband took it. He shuddered every time he took it, but a lot of people with Alzheimer's, they've actually tried to do studies and they can't get some of them to actually drink it. They spit it out. It just doesn't taste good. And, you know, you can imagine if you have Alzheimer's, you might think you're being poisoned, you know, if you taste something like jet fuel, you know. But that the ketone levels, the advantage of it, or the ketone levels are many times higher than MCT oil alone. But the other problem is that there's a lack of sustained release too. The level of ketones, these are my husband's blood studies, you know, when we were trying various doses of this ketone ester to figure out how much to give him. And you can see that it rises extremely rapidly from zero to very high levels in an hour, but it drops off very quickly too. And by 3 to 4 hours, it's pretty much gone. You know, so again, you know, what do you do the rest of the day? So it needs somehow to be sustained, you know, and I think a more moderate level after his experience, a more moderate level that's more sustained would be more helpful. So, you know, basically, medical foods are intended the way they're defined now. You know, the definition's old. The latest update was in 1993. You know, medical foods are allowed to be used for nutritional management of a disorder. You can't make any claims that it improves cognition or memory, anything like that. You know, much less that it cures or prevents the disease. You can only say it's for the dietary management of a disease. And Axona actually ended up going off the market because after 4 years on the market, that was the MCT medical food, the FDA told them there are no nutritional deficiencies in Alzheimer's disease. Well, that's just not true. At the time, I was just shocked, because it's well known since the 1980s that there's decreased glucose uptake in the brain in Alzheimer's. And for many years, that ketones could potentially fix the problem. But what happened, basically, well, nutrition, the purposes of nutrition are really to fuel cells and organs, keep your metabolism working, build and maintain tissues, and replace damaged components of cells. And the scientific evidence since Axona went off the market in 2013 has accumulated to confirm that ketones actually are taken up in the brain in Alzheimer's normally. They're taken up normally, the same areas that have decreased glucose uptake. Ketones can replace glucose as fuel for the brain, therefore. And imaging studies conducted by Dr. Cunane and now several other people have shown that MCT oil, ketone salts, which have been on the market since 2016, and ketone esters, including Dr. Veach's, that's been on the market since 2018. Actually, these ketone esters increase ketones in the brain. They've been able to document that with brain imaging studies. So it's time really for the FDA to change that definition and update it. I am really happy to be part of a startup. I'm the co-founder along with Steve Zarpis, who is the founder of a company called TriVital Therapeutics. And we are developing a medical food. It's patented under a patent at University of South Florida. And this will be a nutritional shake for the dietary management of reduced brain glucose metabolism and Alzheimer's and mild cognitive impairment due to Alzheimer's. The requirements of a medical food is that it's for use under physician supervision. It doesn't necessarily require a prescription, but it does require basically consulting with your physician and being monitored by your physician if you're taking a medical food. This drink, the ketone ester, like I said, tastes not so good, but this is a tasty drink. Our first flavor is going to be chocolate, vanilla, cherry, and it covers the bits of ketones that are in it quite well. So we think that people will like taking it. They'll be able to take it every day. And it's been optimized, for elderly patients who are living at home and in care homes. I mean, this is something that the doctor in a care home, for example, could write an order, to be given daily, in the morning or something like that. And some people, if they're having really significant memory problems, might take it twice a day and possibly even 3 times a day. But and there's no special diet required. This will raise the ketone levels. We have found that it tends to sustain the ketone levels up to maybe 7 hours or so, much longer than the ketone ester itself. We're hoping to raise enough funds to begin a clinical trial in 2026. So just to quote my husband, one of the things he said the day he started the coconut oil, it was like the light came on in my brain again. That's what he said. And he told me that many times, the day he started coconut oil. And so my recommendation about all this, a healthy whole food diet could really slow cognitive decline. Adding ketones to that could increase brain energy and help fill in that brain energy gap as well. So the combination really could be dynamite, I think, for people who want healthy brain aging. And if they're starting to have memory problems, hopefully they can get some help with that by increasing the brain energy. So that's the contact for myself and for Steve Zarpis at TriVital Therapeutics if anybody wants more information about this medical food. And I just want to close there my email. Feel free to email me if you have questions. I have a website called coconutketones.com. And those are my social media links and my books. So thank you so much for your kind attention and patience.
Good work, Dr.
Thank
Mary.
you.
Thank you. Yeah, it
Thank
looks
you.
great.
Yeah.
Jump in real quick. I wanted to ask you if a reduction of the cholesterol in the brain, some of those early studies you're showing, do you think any of that might be from statins, perhaps?
I think it could very well be from statins, and cholesterol is extremely important in the brain. You
Right.
know, some of these atorvastatin, some of the others are what they call lipid soluble. They are stored in fat, so they can accumulate in the brain. And the brain, like 60 to 7% of the lipids in the brain are cholesterol, and there's the support structure of the brain. They literally, all these delicate networks, it kind of helps hold it together. Every single cell membrane in the brain and in the body needs cholesterol in the cell membrane to help support the structure, help make it more fluid, and it lives longer if there's enough cholesterol in the cell membrane. And when the neurons connect with each other. The area is called the synapse. There's like a chemical that crosses over into the neurotransmitters. That process requires cholesterol. So cholesterol is very important in the brain. And my husband he was on a statin for about 5 years, and he got much worse during that time. And shortly after we started the coconut oil, I started really reading up more on it. I was on one too for about 5 years at the same time. And learning about how important cholesterol is in the brain, I thought, is this really what we should do in people, somebody that has Alzheimer's, or elderly people? And if you look at the list of adverse effects, one of them is that statins can increase confusion. And some of the statins also increase the risk of diabetes, which is a really big risk factor for Alzheimer's. It increases the risk by about 6 times. So, um,
Yeah, I had a close friend who
mhm,
we're pretty sure died because of statins side adverse effects.
mhm,
Widowmaker heart attack. The guy was like at the gym every day. I don't even know why he went on them, except he was told, "Oh, you should be doing this," and from NIH, by the way. And
mhm,
then and he just keeled over one night at like
mhm.
60. Unbelievable. Well, it's not
Yeah,
unbelievable, but
yeah. There
all
are
right.
some studies showing that they don't decrease mortality in women at all. And in anybody over age 70, even if they have heart disease, it doesn't seem to decrease mortality. I've seen studies
Yeah.
along those lines. So we went off the statins, and my husband, his cholesterol levels went back up for a while, which you would expect, but then slowly they came down, and over a couple years, it came down to less than 200 normal, as LDL was way down there, I think around 70 or so. And he was taking massive amounts of coconut oil and MCT oil, so, it just wasn't
Yeah, there
a
there are
problem
there are
to take him off of them.
a bunch of studies and docs out there who researchers who feel that cholesterol there is no that's not a it's not an issue. They turned it into one for profit,
Mhm.
but there's nothing. High cholesterol does no relation necessarily to cardiac risk. So
There's a really good documentary that just came out maybe a month or so called The Cholesterol Code. And I know most of the people in this, they're involved with low carb dieting. There's a group called the Coalition for Metabolic Health that's headed up by the Bazooki Group. Their son had severe bipolar disorder on multiple meds. He was living on the streets, and they were billionaires. And he got on his psychiatrist, Dr. Chris Palmer, who wrote a book called Brain Energy, put him on a ketogenic diet, and he improved so dramatically. He was able to get a job again, get off a lot of his medications. And I heard him speak on a stage, about his experience. And he was just so much more normal. And his parents, being very wealthy, they started a foundation. At first, it was for metabolic disorders, but now they've expanded to all metabolic disorders that they're funding a lot of research. They influence the dietary guidelines for Americans. There's a statement in there that uh, low carbohydrate diets may be appropriate, may be beneficial to people with chronic medical conditions. And that was that they're doing, getting that statement into that. They were hoping to eliminate the 10% limit on saturated fat, but apparently the USDA wasn't quite ready to do that yet, pending more information. So hopefully they will get more. I actually was. as they were doing the dietary guidelines for Americans, and I did this with the last round too, I watched all of the public events related to the Dietary Guidelines Committee, and I submitted numerous public comments, including the two papers that I worked on in saturated fat and coconut oil were specifically because they were working on the dietary guidelines, and we hope to influence that, by showing how flawed the research was when they were doing these dietary fat studies, back in the 1950s, to the 1980s that, arrived at this low fat diet. It was a hypothesis that actually was never proven. It did show that replacing saturated fat with polyunsaturated fat lowered cholesterol levels, but they were never able to show that that actually reduced the risk of heart disease.
Yes,
And
I think it increased it. That's what's good for business. Let's go on. I think Lori was the first with her hand up. You're up,
yes.
Lori.
Hi, Lori.
Hi. Well, I have my mother has advanced from MCI to mild dementia, and um, so I that prompted me to do a lot of research along the lines of what you are doing, saying,
Mhm.
and specifically discovering this Dr. Dale Bredesen and the Bredesen Protocol, in which he has 240 papers, which he channeled into with a team, saying what are all the things that could be deficient.
Mhm.
That yes, the amyloid is the after effect of different deficiencies, and for prevention, I've started his recode precode uh, protocol. So his book is called uh, The End of Alzheimer's Program, and his diet is a ketogenic
Ketogenic
diet.
diet. Yeah, I'm
So,
very familiar with his work. His first book came out a while back, The End of Alzheimer's, and he didn't mention the keto diet nearly as much as he does now. Apparently, he's found that that is a very beneficial diet. He did suggest using a little bit of MCT oil in that first version, but now I think he has beefed up, that particular aspect of it. I got to sit next to him at a book signing about 5 or 6 years ago and got to talk to him a lot about this whole thing that happened with my husband. And when he did a second edition, you'll find a page where he has my husband's clocks and a little bit of a story about that, that he decided to include in his second edition, the end of Alzheimer's program. So I'm really familiar, and I really applaud him because he's one of the first people to say that there are many different causes and triggers of Alzheimer's disease, and that plaques and tangles aren't the cause. They're a consequence. They are a problem, but they are not, the cause of Alzheimer's disease. So I really
so
applaud him for that. And my sister Angela, she helped me a lot with emails, for a long time, and she would tell people about these different triggers, that they might check out. That he talked about, I think, 18 holes in the roof that you need to plug to avoid getting Alzheimer's. So I do recommend looking at his information. And have you found how is it helping your mom?
well, my mom, one of her symptoms is she takes in no new information. So I'm going to go see her. I'm going to start with coconut oil, but
Mhm.
she really believes just in the allopathic medicine. But I myself am getting results back of like what a comprehensive diagnostic testing is how they start out working with patients when they call it precision medicine to act on what's out of range for each individual person. And
Right.
they include just a huge spectrum of diagnostic testing.
Yeah, I think that's really a great way to tackle this. And for a while, he didn't recommend. I understood from an associate of his that he didn't recommend coconut oil because he was worried about the cholesterol issue. And so I hope that has changed because if anything, it increases HDL cholesterol and it tends to lower triglycerides. And so I suggest, like, if people are worried about the cholesterol part of it, that they maybe get a baseline lipid profile and that their doctor could order one. I would say wait 3 months because any oil or fat or big change in the diet can affect cholesterol levels temporarily. And it's most, very likely that it will be more stable at around 3 months and maybe check it again, if this is something you're worried about. I mean, somebody that doesn't have heart disease, you know, I just really don't think it's a problem to add coconut oil to the diet. And even people that do have heart disease is probably not a problem. Like the 26 studies that I looked at, there was one that was a 2-year study. It was 190 people, and half of them were given coconut oil. These were all people that had had either stents or heart surgery. They had coronary artery disease. All of them happened to be taking statins. And they compared coconut oil versus sunflower oil, and there was no difference in their cholesterol levels between those two oils at 3 months, 1 year, and 2 years, which was quite interesting. And, they even looked at arterial stiffness, of the arteries, and they found there was no difference between them. It had not worsened, in people that were taking coconut oil. So, they basically felt like, this was unfounded, this worry about coconut oil, like that its effect that it would increase the risk of heart disease. There were 2 deaths that were accidents in the all of the 190 people. And there were 2 people in each group that needed a stent during that 2-year period, So that was the worst thing that happened, but it was equal between the two oils, so
Can I,
you know,
can,
and if anybody wants information about how to add, coconut and MCT oil to the diet, my website, it was on their coconut ketones, ketones.com. I have, you can print out guidelines for using coconut and MCT oil, and I have frequently asked questions.
Sorry,
And
I have to ask you a question because I must leave. I start in 2 minutes another webinar. Are you aware
great.
that Bill Gates made against Alzheimer a product called Memopezil?
Oh, is it memantine, maybe?
No, Memopezil.
I'm
He
not
made
familiar.
that together with China, people from China. Anyway, I have your email. I'm going to send you the information. I'm waiting for your reply.
Right, you
Thank
can
you.
email me. Yeah, feel free
Yes,
to email me,
yes.
anybody that has questions.
thank you, Linda. All right, yeah, we're coming at the top of the hour. Charlie, your hands up. You take, go ahead.
Might as well ask all my questions in subsequent order, I guess, unless you want to interrupt Jim for the follow-up. So let me hide my meeting controls. Here is Jack Wolfson, the paleocardiologist. He's presented twice. Um, Obviously against statins and allopathic mainstream nonsense for the heart. He's seen the light. He was also active against over-vaccination. And when I helped kill a meningitis vaccine mandate in Virginia a couple of years in a row, I was talking to all these old secretaries in the state legislature of Virginia who were excited about getting their shingles shot. And Jim mentioned statins. I was thinking the load of prescriptions that that old people are forced or cajoled to take by their pharma reliant doctors. And I wondered, have you thought about that as a causative agent, not just of Alzheimer's and other diseases, but all kinds of diseases? The pincushion nature of old people in the doctor's office. So
Oh,
what do you
yeah,
think about that?
polypharmacy. When I did hospice and then I did a few years of home health risk assessments for Medicare, people would bring out a tub with 20 to 25 medications they were taking. I mean, a duffel bag or a tub full of medications when I was reviewing their medications. And they were taking medications for their side effects of other medications. And it was shocking. I mean, but so many people now have multiple different chronic diseases. It can involve, their heart, their liver, their lungs are on oxygen, all of these problems, and they're taking just numerous medications for them. One thing, though, it's a little bit of a double-edged sword about the vaccines because one of the things that has emerged, there are thousands of studies implicating microbes, microorganisms as possible causes of Alzheimer's disease. And I mentioned herpes simplex. My husband had fever blisters constantly. Coconut oil has lauric acid that kills those viruses, and he had almost none until he got that that drug trial that set him back. Then he had an outbreak, and he got much worse. And these studies are showing that herpes simplex infections in the herpes family, which includes shingles, that there is a strong association with causing possibly or accelerating Alzheimer's disease. And there are some big studies, what they call cohort studies of hundreds of thousands of people in the UK, showing that the shingles vaccine and flu vaccines and let's see, what's the other one? Oh, the pneumococcal vaccine. Reducing these infections through vaccination can reduce the rate of dementia by about, 27, 29%. So it's like, seeing what happened to my husband with, I do believe herpes simplex might have been the cause, the trigger of why he got it so early. He had usually had him on his mouth, but he had an episode where he developed all around his eye. He was extremely sick. He said he never felt mentally the same after that, and some of these studies do show that, people can have an infection earlier in life and start to develop Alzheimer's, 10 years later or so. So, I think there may be too many vaccines in many ways, but there are a couple that might be able to reduce the risk of dementia if a virus is the cause of it. If somebody has, chicken pox virus lives in your brain forever. Most people my age, I'm 74, but most people my age or older had chicken pox. There was no vaccine, and so many get shingles. It lives in your body your whole life, and then you break out with it when your immune system gets weaker when you get older, or you're stressed or something like that. So that's, something to think about, I guess.
Has there ever been a comparison study with disease outcomes between the vaccinated and unvaccinated when it comes to old people and Alzheimer's?
Yeah, that's what the cohort studies looked at, people who were and were not vaccinated. And the ones that were vaccinated for like shingles, flu vaccines, and pneumococcal vaccines had, yeah, it was like 27 to 29% lower risk of dementia than the people that were unvaccinated. And when I
Interesting.
did hospice, I had patients that were covered with shingles. I remember one man specifically. I mean, it really caused him to die. I mean, he was just covered with these blisters from shingles and so much pain and highly contagious too. Like if somebody hasn't had chicken pox, they can catch it from somebody that
Yeah,
has.
I just want to jump in, Dr. Mary. There's been a
Yeah.
lot of talk about publication bias and ghostwriters and fake studies to sell, sell products.
Mm,
So what, because I worked actually with the FDA on pneumococcal and flu vaccines, educational programs for them. And on
mm,
the inside, people were saying they don't do anything. I mean, I'm just sharing that.
mm,
But I think it's a big business. And that study sounds suspicious to me. That's all. Okay,
mm.
keep
Well,
going,
these were
Charlie.
Yeah.
epidemiologists in
Y-
the UK, so they weren't in the US.
Same companies.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, let me share my screen. Yeah, I think we're finding out that a lot of industry funded science um, has a lot of
it
flaws
can
in their
definitely be
studies. And
biased. It definitely can be biased.
yeah,
I'll agree
and
with that.
here's a recent tweet from Jessica Rojas. Yet another study showing that much of the studies published in the journals is unreliable at best, if not completely false. And I
Mm,
think Miss Angle said that too at the New England Journal of Medicine. The editor of the British Journal of Medicine said the same thing. He could not trust the veracity of any of the studies that he allowed published in his journals. And then we have also other studies that showed the failure of these so-called legitimate studies to be reproduced. So yeah, I appreciate you sharing that, but we have a
yeah.
lot of other experts that show that the only result from over vaccination is much higher chronic disease, like thousands of percent more.
Mm,
So we'll table that.
Yeah.
for another day.
And just
I
wait
did want
before
to.
And
I
I
want
do
to.
have to say that Leqembi, that drug, I don't understand how the FDA allowed that on the market with a 1 in 5 rate of bleeding or fluid leakage in the brain. I mean, that's really serious. And it was a 0.7% risk of death. So for 10,000 people that take it, 700 people die because they're taking that drug. And these are people who don't even have Alzheimer's yet. They have mild cognitive impairment and mild Alzheimer's. And these are the only people it's indicated for. They have to be in a clinical trial. It's massively expensive and only slows down cognitive decline by a few months. There was another drug similar to it called Aduhelm that was on the market, also approved. Similar risk. It was almost the same kind of drug. It was a monoclonal antibody that removes plaque, and they found that they took it off the market because doctors couldn't really see any obvious difference in their patients that were getting this IV infusion every 2 weeks and at extreme expense. So there are definitely, and I think the
Well,
pharmaceutical industry has been the biggest block. I think they've heavily influenced the FDA on these medical foods. Food is
oh yeah,
medicine
we know that
idea.
there it's all
Yeah,
money, and maybe that drug was passed along with remdesivir, which we know caused kidney organ failure, and oh, it's okay, and all these people died.
right.
Charlie, I was going to say related to this, and you, and you can ask this, but you're working on the environmental aspect of how these energies, the wireless mesh affects us. That could be part of it. Charlie, what do jump in
Well,
for?
I was going to ask that too. We
No,
run out of time, of course, but you mentioned the problem of synthetic fats compared to natural fats. The same dynamic occurs with wireless radiation, which are non-native electromagnetic radiation. And studies show a third of the country is now sensitive to this stuff, up to 5% seriously so. And the way it hurts people is it agitates your DNA. That's what the National Toxicology Program found, which is upstream from all other diseases. So it makes you sort of like vaccination just crushes your immunity in such horrible ways. When you
Mhm.
combine that synergistically with the wireless assaults, you're making especially vulnerable older people just open for any kind of chronic disease, probably including Alzheimer's and other problems. What do you think about that synergistic effect of all these environmental toxins that
Mhm.
leave old people ready to kick the
Yeah,
bucket?
I agree with that. I mean, that's something that I've kind of been I've gotten information about over the years, and I'll just tell you, like for my own family, my one daughter and her husband were looking at a subdivision, and when we looked closely at it, there were these huge power lines, that went for miles that cut right through, right alongside their neighborhood, and I thought, I don't think you should put your house there because there is a lot of worry about it. I mean. I have a bit of tinnitus, that ringing in the ears. It's much worse when I've been watching TV for 2 hours, and blue light can affect your vision. I usually wear blue light tinted glasses, when I'm on my computer or, and anything like that, because of all these different worries about it. So I agree, those are things we definitely need to think about. And I mean, another thing is air pollution. That's a big, heavy metals in the air, that can get into the brain, cadmium, mercury, iron, lead, they're in areas that are polluted, they're in the air and people are inhaling that. It's finding their way into their brains. And, these plaques, they found that the stuff that forms the plaques is actually antimicrobial, but it also engulfs other foreign bodies. They find heavy metals in these plaques too. For most people, the biggest exposure would be if they live in an area that's polluted by like vehicular exhaust and exhaust from factories and that kind of thing. A lot of people want to plant a garden in their backyard. And back when I was in college, I spent a summer working at the Bureau of ATF in Cincinnati in their chemistry department and worked on a soil analysis project. And people brought it from all over Cincinnati, and some of the soil was like almost black. And I thought, what is this? And it was loaded with lead and iron and all these things. And I thought, if you plant tomatoes and your soil that looks like that is loaded with these chemicals, the plants absorb that stuff. They absorb these minerals. And I think in one of my books I wrote that people should have their soil tested, before, especially if they live in an area where there's a lot of traffic, before they plant tomatoes and eat them, from their own garden.
Yeah.
So there
Well, I
are all
think
kinds of issues out there with
some of
our
the
living
some
environment.
of the heavy metals that you mentioned probably are from the vaccines because, as you probably know, the
Yeah,
adjuvant
like
is
mercury,
aluminum. Well, mercury in the past, more so aluminum now.
and
And that
aluminum.
goes that pierces the blood-brain barrier.
Right.
So I think with RFK's help and leadership, we're learning more about vaccines than most people know at this point. Also, probably geoengineering. The jet exhaust does now include barium, strontium, and aluminum, and other heavy metals that gets into the soil, and then the pesticides and GMOs that they use in the farms and gardening. So I think there is a definite synergistic effect. And just to clarify the wireless risk. Power lines, yes, there's some risk, but we're talking about the routers in your home, the cell phones
Mhm.
everyone uses, the
Right.
sensors people are putting for medical devices to monitor old people, especially.
Mhm.
Those all emit radio frequency and microwave radiation. And
Yeah.
the small cells they're putting on every other street lamp.
Mhm.
So it's specific antennas that are putting in the Internet of Things in your TV or fridge. So it's much more ubiquitous
Right.
and getting closer and closer to us. So thank you
Yeah.
for that answer.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, aluminum, I agree with you. That is another one of those metals. It's not, you don't require any, but I read somewhere that the average person gets about 8 or 9 milligrams a day of aluminum that they're eating, cooking in aluminum cookware, aluminum cookie sheets. A lot of foods are in some kind of an aluminum foil package, and you can pick up aluminum, from those kind of things. And that's not healthy. And, yeah. So
Hey,
just all kinds of things we have to worry about like that.
Dr. Mary, let's wrap up. Tell people
Okay.
again how to find you, what the best website is, social media. I know it's on the page there, but just give a quick
Yeah.
summary.
Yeah. So you can email me at Mary Newport md@gmail.com. My website is Coconut Ketones. It's COCONUTKETONES .com. There's no Y in ketones. A lot of people try to do that. And it's mostly Mary Newport or Mary Newport MD on various social media. I'm on LinkedIn. I have a TikTok account. I haven't added anything new lately. I really should, but I've got a lot of information about coconut oil and my books and different things like that on TikTok. And I have a YouTube channel that's got a ton of podcasts on it. And this podcast will also go on there, and I'll put it on other social media. So I'm really so pleased to be part of this podcast. I really thank you so much for inviting me to come on. It's always good to have a healthy discussion.